Right. Good morning. I'm um, uh, Representative Peternell, and I'm calling to order the subcommittee work session on House Bill 293, preventing minors from accessing obscenity on certain electronic devices with internet access. So, welcome. We do have members of the audience. I am not sure if we will be calling on you for technical support, but it's possible that we could, but it's not a given that you will be uh, that you will have time for public input. So we have discussed this bill several times in committee, and there are several issues that have come up, and we do have some feedback from members of the public regarding what regarding some of the issues that have come up surrounding this bill. So hopefully we can all work together and put something forward that will be acceptable to the committee. So does anybody have anything that they'd like to start with? Yes, Representative Kutab.
Thank you, Chairwoman Peternell. I think that this bill is really important for the safety of kids. I think parents do their best, but some are obviously more technically capable than others, and even the most technically capable, things like this can be difficult. I think Apple's already doing it, so it's showing that there's a way to get it done. And I guess I'd like to hear from the other two members if they think that there potentially would be a path forward for them, what that might look like. I think that might be a good place to start in terms of, so then we know what we need specifically to work on.
Representative McFarland.
Thank you. I think, first of all, I won't bother to rehash my thoughts on the original bill, which I discussed at some length in the committee hearing and in the committee work session. The reason that I am sitting here is that I am keen to find a form of words which is, I would like to say broadly acceptable, but certainly acceptable to most of the members. Because I think it is a very important set of concerns. Where my mind is at the moment is, first and foremost, I would like to understand what my fellow members here think is a minimum viable set of criteria to be addressed, and see how we can address those in the best way. If you're asking me out of the gate where my head is currently at, I am strongly in favor of parental responsibility for minors and individual responsibility overall. And I think that it's important that whatever language we end up with does not create an infringement upon those individual liberties, either directly in law or as a result of the incentivization or disincentivization to corporations that is created by the law. So that's where I'm currently at. And I would also throw out that I have looked into some existing statutes from other states, and I'm aware that there are other states that have been able to enact positive bills around education and around responsibility. You mentioned that Apple has taken strides on this, and I think that's informative in a couple of ways. It's instructive because that is something that they were able to do without any language being introduced and passed on the floor of the House here in New Hampshire. And second of all, because I think that the kind of approach that you see Apple take is sensible and reflective of approaches that I think might actually not only work for legislation, but also, frankly, work for our constituents and our families.
Thank you. Representative Tur.
Yeah, thanks. So I actually agree quite a bit with what Representative McFarland said. I think there's a balance here between protecting children, which I think we all agree is important, and both the practicality of the solution, the impact on different aspects of the electronics world, and where the onus lies for this. Again, I don't want to rehash all the things that were said, but the approach taken in the bill, I think it solves one problem and causes other problems. The idea of basically having something activated at the time you purchase and subscribe to access for a device is a practical solution to getting around the age verification problem that all the other solutions seem to have run into. But it then places the onus on the device um, uh, manufacturer and maybe even beyond that on the whatever organization or company is producing the browser windows within that device. I'll admit to not being an Apple user, so I don't know what Apple's solution is. I know in the hearing, some people said, "Oh, this filter exists, already." But when I said, "Do you just mean the safe search filter?" and they said, "No, it's not that," and I said, "Do you mean one of these AI bot sort of things that watches all your, browsing?" which I'd be uncomfortable with. They said, "No, it's not that." So I'm not sure. This mandates the activation of a filter that I'm not sure exists, or at least exists on all devices. So the blanking on the name. I also brought up last time the SCOTUS decision recently from the Texas case on Paxton, and that passed muster with the Supreme Court, and basically placed the onus, as far as my reading understands it, placed the onus on the companies that operate these fairly explicit websites, you know, to basically have them do the age verification. And to me, that seems like a much more targeted solution than trying to somehow enable a broad-based filter that's going to, capture maybe some, probably not all of the potential, and also make it device specific so that same child can probably find some other device to be logged onto and find that same content if that's what they want. So, I think I had said, I'd love to see that there's some practical way forward, but without infringing on a lot of folks' rights and without interfering with the way people use their electronic devices. And it feels like the best solution might be to consider something targeting the organizations that put this content out, often for profit, rather than sort of asking for the devices. If it last thing, if it helps parents, again, if there is such a filter, I think parents that care about this would know it and would activate that filter. Talk to their children, hopefully, also about what they're looking for online and why they might be finding this, assuming they were looking for it. So I think empowering the parents to filter or to prescribe what their children can see is a great thing. I'm just not sure the way this bill is structured, it does that in a way that is either practical or effective. So I'll leave it there, but open to, and I have not seen the other states' approaches yet. I know that may be circulating.
Yes, they're circulating right now. And to be honest with you, because we planned this on sort of short notice, I didn't have a chance over the weekend to look through these. So I would suggest that this won't be the last subcommittee work session. We'll probably have another one in the future, sometime in October. But I have looked briefly at Utah's law, and it's very similar to what we're suggesting. And I believe that did pass, if I'm not mistaken. So it's not as if New Hampshire is at the forefront of this. And when it comes to the age verification, I know that is helpful. There were some proponents of this bill who had thought about submitting age verification, but because that was being contested at the Supreme Court, we held off on that. And I guess the way I look at this is more like in the way that we regulate, say, marijuana or not marijuana, we don't regulate um, alcohol or tobacco, in that we definitely don't sell those products to minors. We ask for their ID, but there's always a way for them to access something that they're not supposed to be accessing. So we just have to do the best we can in order to prevent them from accessing some of this information. I mean, certainly back in the day when magazines were the thing, there were certain magazines that weren't, on display in the grocery store. And they were behind the counter or behind the curtain at the back of the store. So I think that's kind of the approach we're going for here rather than a blanket outright ban. So just to be putting some more protective measures in place is what we're looking for, I believe. So some of the questions that we've had is like that the bill isn't technically feasible, but if Apple can do it, that to me would imply that other technology is capable on other device producers. So I'm not sure where to go there. Um, I am attending a conference at the end of this month with some of the producers of these, so I will hopefully be able to have conversations with them about what is truly um, technically possible. So another question that we had is that the market is beginning to solve for this. Um, so, but it's really hard to find. I did look through what you have to do on Apple, and it's like you have to open settings and then click this link, click this link, click this link, and it's really hard to follow the instructions, even though they look fairly simple. And one of the things that I bring up, and I know it's certainly not a large representative sample, but my own children were at like the forefront of all of the social media and cell phone device. Um, and now two of them are parents already, so they're like first generation um, cell phone users now who are now parenting. And I've asked them what they would like. They love the idea of the filter. And I asked one of them, what if we just put a label inside the cell phone packaging that said these filters are available and here's how you activate them? And, my daughter said, well, the chances of people reading that is slim. So I'm just trying to be open to what the possibilities are out there, because certainly my own children gave me a lot of pushback on the use of devices, without a doubt. And I do wish that there were more filtering devices available early on. But the technology moved really fast, and so just having conversations with your kids isn't always a safeguard, because children like to not do what their parents tell them sometimes. So I really hope we can continue working on this. So yeah, so one of the arguments or questions was that the no filter could guarantee the 100% success rate. And I think we just discussed that. So any other comments, Donald? Oh,
Yeah.
sorry, Representative McFarland.
Thank you, Representative Pendle. There are two things I wanted to throw in on what you just said. I think, first of all, that when you talk about, oh, look, Apple can do X, but this bill is problematic. Well, indeed, the bill has an intent, and I think we've heard testimony very clearly as to what that intent is, and we all think that intent is laudable. That is not what is written in the bill. And I certainly don't think it is fair to say that Apple is doing everything that's written in the bill, nor should anyone. But I do think that they are attending to the intent. And so that brings me to my second point, which is when we're trying to write law that is going to respond to this intent, and I'm avoiding saying when we're going to prescribe something, because I don't think we should necessarily be prescribing all aspects of this. There are maybe some aspects that use prescription. But when we're prescribing something, it is far harder to solve that problem by saying there are going to be no devices and no circumstances and no use cases where these bad things can be done, than it is to say that we will provide parents with a mechanism and with devices where they can, to a reasonable level of assurance, ensure that those bad things are not done. That is something that is achievable, that is responsive to the market demand, and that does not result in a circumstance where all of these other edge cases become illegal or otherwise problematic. And so I think I would summarize that by saying, if we feel that these families, that our constituents want a solution that is going to enable them to incrementally allow their children as they mature, which is not a function of age alone, but as they mature, to have increasingly greater access to content and to technical destinations and so forth on the internet, then we should be supportive of vendors that provide those kind of approaches and that provide sufficient controls and education and walls to enable that. And so that's, I think, one of the reasons why you keep hearing from both sides of this debate the use of Apple as an example, because Apple is a very tightly controlled ecosystem. It is a closed garden ecosystem of, we are going to tell you how your devices may work, should work, will work. It's not the more traditional computers that are open to anyone to do as they will with, and to play and hack and learn and engineer as they will with. Now, I'm not saying it is black or white. There's definitely some complexity, and I think that, again, it even within any one of those vendors' products, it then starts to depend upon, well, which product is it, and so on and so forth. But I do think that if we try and craft a bill which applies across the board to any possible device, there is never going to be a solution that will make everyone or even a majority of people happy. And I think that those kind of solutions will also not pass constitutional muster. So I guess I come back to my prior comment that I would like to figure out what we consider to be the minimum set of features and behaviors that we would like to see in products that parents can choose. And if these products cost 10 times a device that has no such controls, I would say to you, okay, that sounds like a problem that also needs to be addressed. But I don't think that that is the case. I think that there is going to be a premium for these kind of protections. Nobody works for free, and keeping tabs on all of this is not trivial. But I do think that the major vendors are not only capable of delivering a solution here, but they already have delivered some solutions here. And if we narrow in on those, then, if you have a parent that says, I am going to ignore that possibility, I am going to give, if you want to use analogies around magazines, I'm going to give this XXX pornographic magazine to my child, then I don't think that there's anything we can do to stop that in practical terms, and nor do I necessarily think that that is the right place for us to be legislating.
Yes, Representative Kutab.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that right now it is a misdemeanor if you give your child a pornographic magazine. It is a criminal act to do so. So I guess I'm finding a hard time seeing the difference between providing a magazine and providing that digitally to the child. And I would say it is a misdemeanor currently. And I guess the only thing that kind of is differentiated is that it's saying it's knowingly. So you're knowingly providing a minor with this. But I guess I don't see the problem with when you log onto your phone to first set up the device, because that's the time when a parent is going to be able to really enable filters and whatnot. If it's asking you what your age is and blocking the child from seeing pornographic material, I don't see what the problem in doing that is. I think when you go to buy a pornographic magazine, they're asking you to see your ID. We're not asking them to see their ID. And the parents would still have to be involved, right? Because the parents are going to be the ones that are setting up the device with the child. So if the parents are completely uninvolved and just giving the child the phone to set up on their own, then that's on the parents, right? They're not making their child enter in that they're under 18. That's on the parents. And this, if that's what the parents want to do, then you're not going to help them. So I guess the parents would still have an option if they just absolutely felt like they didn't want their kids to be monitored. For the ones that do want to do it the right way and put in that their child is under 18 and that they don't want them to access that, I guess, what's the problem with that?
Yeah, so I'll just narrowly respond to your points. I think, first of all, analogies are treacherous. And my point was less about saying, here is the specific content, which we can agree there are existing misdemeanors covering, but more saying, here is a blank magazine that could contain this or could contain something else, or it could be a magazine store. You know, if I have somebody that is given a device where they're able to get any content, that is not tantamount to saying that I expect you, or to your point about knowing me, that I know you, but even that I expect you or would hope that you would go and get that particular content. But I think the second thing you raise is even more troubling, and that is this question of age verification. In order to provide age verification, I mean, there's lots of different approaches that might be taken, but I'll bucket it into two groups. We could provide age verification at the device level in some kind of walled garden ecosystem, which would not be applicable to all ecosystems. Or we could provide age verification somewhere more close to actually fetching and viewing the content. That latter option, which I think is what is contemplated in the current language, that option, first of all, we can argue as to whether it is technically workable, and I don't believe it is, because I believe you can provide answers which frustrate the system. But it also creates a circumstance where law-abiding citizens are now forced to maintain and disclose a digital identity for everything that they do. And the privacy concerns there are huge. You know, New Hampshire, probably of all of our states, but certainly is one of the states that has been most protective of individual privacies. And the idea that we would turn around and say, you cannot do things on the internet without first providing some assurance of identity and checking against databases of ages and so on and so forth. It's something that I find to be so outside of any reasonable sort of Overton window here that I didn't give it a lot of shrift. But that's my reaction.
Yes, certainly.
Thank you. So this isn't asking you to provide, we had another bill that did just that, but this is not that bill. This isn't asking you to provide your identification of any sort. This is just when you set up the device, it's going to ask how old you are. And hopefully your parents are setting up the device with you. It's not asking you to verify or check databases or licenses or whatnot. It's just when you set up the device, you enter in your age, and it would still be the responsibility of the parents when the device is being set up to make sure that the accurate information is being entered. It's not going to verify who you are or aren't. There was another bill last year which was killed, which you would have had to provide a copy of your license, which I don't think necessarily would have done much because people don't keep their licenses locked up in safes, right? You can get a copy of it somehow. But this is just when you're first setting up the device. It's a new device, you're entering in what your age is.
I would say, I think to follow up on what you just said, Representative Kutab, when I read the bill, it just says, ask the user to provide the user's age. And to me, that doesn't sound much different than when I go on a website, say I go to the New Hampshire Liquor Commission website and they say, how old are you? And
Isn't
I
that
just say,
completely
I'm only 21. No.
Forgive me, but isn't that completely useless then?
Well, it is in general, right? But
Mhm.
this is asking when you set up your device, so then you can't change it afterwards. If you do it on each individual website, kids are just going to lie and they're going to check and say, "Yeah, I'm 21."
Representative Tur.
Yeah, a couple of things, somewhat related. I want to also echo something that Representative McFarland said, which is, the Apple analogy is not generalizable because of the way apples work. And I'd love for someone to explain how this filter works on apples. But, you know, to the extent that Apple has this closed ecosystem, they know what browser you are using. They have control over the device that an Android phone, and that's why I'm not an Apple person, doesn't have. So I have 3 different browsers on my phone for different purposes. I think we should stay focused also on where does the responsibility for this control exist? Because in the Android ecosystem, making it the responsibility of the device manufacturer, I don't think makes a lot of sense, because you can download any number of different browser softwares, which will probably each approach this differently, if at all. The other question is the responsibility on every browser manufacturer to make sure they comply with this? So that's a second place where you can place the control. Or is it on the store where you buy the software? It sounds like this is asking for something that's not. When I originally read this, my impression was this was sort of, you would have to show something when you set up the device, purchasing your phone for your child. Again, that solves the age verification problem because you have a person with a license, and you can check. I do agree that the problem with the software-based age verification is that it's fairly useless. I mean, the same thing. I was just looking at the New Hampshire liquor store. It doesn't even ask you for your age or anything. It just says you must be of legal age to enter this site. Are you over 21? Yes or no? And I don't think most parents sit down with their children and go through the entire setup process with them. Maybe they do. I think if there are parents who prioritize this kind of control over their child's content, there are probably browsers that, would have a competitive advantage. Maybe Apple will have a competitive advantage, amongst that group. I also want to raise up in this bill, to Representative Kutab's point about the magazines. This makes it a Class B felony to disable this filter. And it says a person or manufacturer that intentionally disables. So, essentially it's a Class B filter, and it does say with the intent, but again, who knows what the intent is. So I could imagine the way this is written, a parent who does not want to monitor their child's internet browsing, theoretically being, at risk for a Class B felony. I don't think we want to go there. I hope that's not where we want to go. I'll just say it was fairly permissive. I told my kids how to If they needed to talk about anything, it's always good. I think there's different ways of approaching it that different people take. And I think criminalizing and placing, private rights of action on, not complying with turning on a filter over the internet is, to me, where this becomes really goes beyond unworkable to getting into what I consider to be a bit of a dangerous zone.
Representative Kutab.
I thank you. I do hear what you're saying about the felony part. I guess I would say, would you be more comfortable if it just said misdemeanor? Because right now you can't give your child a pornographic magazine without it being a misdemeanor.
I mean, I'd be more comfortable, but it doesn't mean I would be happy with it. I still think that's deeply problematic. I don't feel like I'd be committing a misdemeanor with my children either. If I decided that, I'd rather talk to them about the content that's out there, knowing that they can get it anywhere else than in my mind, assuming that I'm going to, be able to somehow stop them from finding this by turning on a software service. But again, the balances between the practicality on one side and the sort of real questions that you get into about, the ability to, manage this process for your family and to, and even obviously what gets into the constitutional rights questions about some of this. So, I still go back to, if there are sites that make their living off of, selling this type of material, seems like the Paxton case that just went through, and I'm not saying I would back that without seeing details, but it seems more practical. I mean, we had a proposal last session where it said you had to actually submit, a copy of your driver's license to gain access to some of this. You could do that if it was a site that you had particularly identified as being problematic. I still think that's logistically will get very, very difficult and people would not like it. But, as opposed to basically saying, we're going to turn on this filter, you're going to say, yes, I'm old enough to turn it on. And then that's going to provide the content. I think most parents, if this is something they really care about, you go to Best Buy, the Geek Squad will help you find that filter.
None of us are. I don't believe. I have a question, Representative McFarland. Because I am a very unsophisticated computer user, I wanted to ask a question about what I think I heard you say in terms of Apple being a closed system. And am I understanding that you think or that the ability for someone to utilize computers in a broader capacity that somebody like me wouldn't necessarily comprehend because I'm not in the world of software engineering and things like that, that would be hampered? Is that a concern or am I misconstruing what you said there?
Well, I think you're misconstruing it as far as that you wouldn't be able to understand. I'm quite sure you would be. But I think the point that I'm making is that, and I'll use some specific examples because I don't think it's limited to Apple by any means. Representative Tora mentioned Android. And while there are certainly significant differences in approach between Apple iOS and Google Android, both of those operating systems, as long as they have not been hacked and rooted, as it can be called, are fairly controlling and restrictive as far as what may be done if the settings are set to be so controlling and restrictive. The capabilities exist within those operating systems to satisfy what I think the intent of this bill is. The counterexample would be if I have a general purpose computer that I want to be able to, as you say, do programming with and do other things with. And when does it become the purview of that computer to lock down the entire hardware and everything that is run upon it, and understand everything that's run upon it in order to do so, and say, okay, now you can't do this and you can't do that. Well, so in practical terms, I'll use an example of one of my servers at home. If I have a server that I am running VMware ESXi on, that server may be used to support simultaneously dozens of different, what other people may describe as computers, dozens of different virtual machines running different operating systems. One of them might be running Linux, one of them might be running Windows, one of them might be running Mac OS, and on and on. And within those operating systems, there might be a program running, and the operating system doesn't know what the program is doing. And the hypervisor on the physical server certainly doesn't know what the program is doing. And you're asking that every possible program is adequately restricted in terms of what it is doing and what content it is getting. So, the short answer to your question is no, that is not a feasible approach. And so you start getting into reasonableness. You start getting into these tests of, well, what do we reasonably intend here? What is a reasonable approach for the manufacturer, whoever the manufacturer is? I mean, the example I just quoted, there's literally dozens of different vendors involved in the delivery of that platform. And I'm not sure which of them or which set of them would be accountable. We're running the risk here of, as I said in the committee hearing, creating a chilling effect on the vendors. And I think nobody here wants to do that. What we want to do is protect the children. So if we know that we want to protect the children, and if essentially our only concern with making it a familial, a parental responsibility is that we think that some of the current approaches that are available to the parents are a little bit too complicated to operate, then maybe we should be focused in on making it less complicated to operate or providing education so that it is easier to operate.
Thank you. So, as a follow-up, if this particular legislation is targeting cell phones and tablets in particular, are they capable of doing any of those more sophisticated? Do they have any more sophisticated capacity that someone like me completely misses in the use of the tools?
So first of all, I would say to you that this cell phone is many, not just many times, but orders of magnitude more powerful in terms of processing, in terms of memory, in terms of communication throughput, in all of these different terms, than the computer that I had when I was 7 or 8 years old, or even than the computer that I had when I was 20 or 30 years old. So can any one of these devices be used for these other purposes and do an awful lot more? Absolutely. And you don't have to run Google Android on Eric's cell phone, on Representative Tura's cell phone. You can run your own operating system. You can build your own. You can write your own operating system. And I hope we have people in New Hampshire who are doing that. In fact, I know that we do. And you ask about the devices that are contemplated in the bill. You'll recall that in the committee hearing, I pointed out that the language of the bill as it stands would include all kinds of devices, potentially including vehicles. I have an automobile outside that would be subject to the bill as written. The computer in that vehicle is not as capable, at least the computer relative to the piece we're talking about here, is, I believe, not as capable as the computer in this phone, but it is still vastly more powerful than the computer that I had and that other people had only a decade or two ago. So I think unless we are going to say, you may recall we had another bill, which I think may even still be retained in this committee, about the right to compute. And unless we're going to say that we do not have the right to compute, then we're not in a position to say that one piece of hardware can only be used for one operating system and one purpose.
Thank you very much for that explanation. I still have trouble with the car. Can you tell me about this computer in your car? Because you have brought this up multiple times, and I don't have a car, I don't believe, with that capability unless I connect to the Representative Tur, do you want to answer that?
I will. I drive a Tesla. It has a giant screen right in the middle of the car, and it has its own web browser that does not go through my cell phone. And you open it, it looks just like a browser, probably based somewhat on the Google system, but you know, I can pull up the general court's website while I'm on the road in my car. So there, I mean, admittedly, the person behind the wheel of the car probably doesn't get covered by the content we're talking about here, but yes, I do agree with the concept that computing power is everywhere, and the access point to the material that we're talking about isn't the device; it's the browser. Ultimately, it's the website of the person who's putting the material up on the web that controls it. I think the device-based approach to even trying to address this problem is part of the problem I have with this bill, because I think, as I said, the locus of control, the place where you might even consider regulating, isn't with the device. It's more closely associated with the software that the device is running, which can be any number of things. I agree. Like, you have to go through the Play Store to get, or there's a couple of different places to get an app on your phone. On my computer, I don't have to do any of that. I can run whatever I want, or to Representative McFarland's point, I could also build my own technology if I was so inclined. So, I think it's if you can define the content even that we're talking about, there are certain websites clearly who make their entire business serving that content. That might be a closer place to start, but but trying to put it across the board, and tie it and tie the liability to either the manufacturer or some other thing, or the parent, I think is where I it starts getting into an area where I could very quickly see. And one more point, I think, yet another place where if something like this is important, the idea of doing it state by state is also kind of wildly out of gear. I mean, it's the 603 area code of your cell phone in New Hampshire is rapidly degrading. Cell phones get set up all over the place, and they come into the state, and I could see basically the same situation existing where we have different rules in Vermont and different rules in Massachusetts, and depending on where people live and where they shop for their electronics, it's just further muddying up the water. I wouldn't imagine being a manufacturer that had to comply with rules like this, wherever it exists.
I think I see your point somewhat there, and there are definitely certain goods that we restrict in certain states, like fertilizer, for example. If you go online, we will not ship to Maine or certain other states. So and to your point, I think it does get a little more blurry because these are a little more portable. If you wanted to buy fertilizer, you would have to drive to another state and buy it, and no one was going to be checking that your license plate was from a different state. So I think I will let Representative Kutab speak, because I think you had your hand up.
Thank you. I guess I want to ask, what if this bill said that the manufacturers had to, at the time that the parents are setting up the phone, offer this filter and instructions on their website about how to do it, but really just offering this filter so that when you're setting up the device, it's asking you right from the get-go what your age is and if you want to turn on these filters. And then we removed the part about if you knowingly turn this off that it's a crime, because I do see your point about criminalizing parents. Although I do still think if a parent gives their child a pornographic magazine, it is still a crime. And what if we further clarified where the definition is that it says mobile device, if we clarified that that's a handheld device, so that it's clear that it doesn't include a computer in a car, for example, because I don't want to be chilling parents that may share a car with their teenager, that then the parents can't do whatever they want on their own car computer if parents are watching obscene materials in their garage, perhaps. I don't really know.
I'm sure that doing obscene things in cars is something that we have no familiarity with. Unless you've been filing bills from your car, from the Tesla. Sorry. No, I just want to come back to the question about devices and why I'm saying this can be and this isn't. The language right now is that device means a tablet or smartphone manufactured on or after the effective date of this chapter. But what is a tablet and what is a smartphone? Both of those terms are also defined in the bill. And so Representative Kutab talks about, well, maybe we could define it as handheld. Smartphone is defined as handheld. This is what I think the intent of a smartphone is. The way it's defined, this is a smartphone as well. It combines a cell phone with a handheld computer. It offers internet access through many browsers, including at least one browser, has data storage, has text, has email capabilities. So my tablet here is a smartphone. It's also a tablet, probably. This computer here is nothing relative to this bill. This computer here is not covered. I can take this computer and give it to my child and have them browse all kinds of things all day long and not be covered by this bill. If this computer, as many of them do, had a cellular modem installed in it, now it would suddenly be covered by these clauses. And just to close the loop on the vehicles, I don't have a Tesla, but I do have a mobile device equipped with a mobile operating system, a touchscreen display, a rechargeable battery, and the ability to support access to a cellular network. And so my car outside is in fact a tablet, according to this bill.
Thank you very much. Yes, Representative Tur.
And just to add, like, I've been looking through my settings as I'm sitting here to see if I can find anything where on my phone it says that it's going to restrict content. There is a safe search filter, but it's in my browser. It's in Chrome, which is my most commonly used browser, but not my only browser. And so, the idea that I just don't even see, like, in this device right now, that there is a setting that you could activate when the phone is first set up that would tell all the software on there that if it's going to access the internet, it's going to have to activate some sort of filter within the browser. I just don't think the device is even the right place to consider this. And again, it keeps going down the line. So if it's not the device, then it's the browser. But is it the browser? Can that find all the content? Does that technology exist? Because again, I asked during the hearing, is this the safe search filter? And they said, no, it's not the safe search filter. And the safe search filter does some of what we're talking about, and it's not hard to turn on, but it's also not hard to turn off.
Right. Thank you. Representative Kutab.
Thank you. So I spent a little bit while I was sitting here, that's what I was doing on my phone, trying to find where it was on the iPhone. And essentially on the iPhone, where it is under, you have to go under several different areas. You have to go under your settings. And then I have to go over to screen time, and then I have to go to my family, and then I have to click on one of my kids' names, and then I have to go over to content and privacy restrictions, and then I have to go over to Now I just lost where it was. Now you seem, oh, wait, okay. So then you have to go to App Store, Media, Web, and Games, which is really not counterintuitive because you'd think it would be under like allowed apps and features, but it's not. It's under App Store, Media, Web, and Games. And then under there, there's another section called Web Content where you can limit adult websites, which would limit the adult websites from any browser that you're using essentially. And then it has on there that you can limit TV shows, movies, like other things that you could otherwise download on your thing. But I think the thing is that for a parent to get to all these places is, it took me a little bit to find it, and I do have a software engineering degree. And and I'll admit it took me a while to find all of that. So I think if when you're first setting up the device, it's asking you for the age and it's setting up the restrictions based on that, that's something a lot more doable for people. But to have to go down all these steps and paths to find all of this, that's
Yeah, I would have to say I went through it also and had similar difficulties. So I'm certainly thankful that someone with more background in computers has the same challenges. Um, so as you were going through that, I could picture something in my mind of like, are you under the age of 17? Yes. Do you want the filter enabled? Yes. Click, done. Like rather than you, I mean, certainly what you just went through would be there if you wanted to backtrack and enable those filters. But I certainly can envision something quite much simpler than the process you just went through upon the purchase of one of these devices. And whether that's through a law that we pass in our state right now, or whether that becomes something advanced at the federal level, or all of the individual manufacturers decide that they want to take that up on their own, this is a really important conversation to be having because it's not going to go away. These children are definitely being exposed to material on a regular basis that many people um, think that they should not be exposed to. In fact, some adults might even want this filter because sometimes things appear that you're like, oh, I can't believe I just saw that. I didn't need to see that. I don't ever want to see that again. And it's hard to prevent those things on even an adult's computer. So I think we do have some workable progress. I think Representative Kutab made some recommendations that would certainly be worth taking under consideration. I'm not sure we're going to come to a resolution today, and I don't want to take up everybody's time on a beautiful day like this, unless you have other issues that you want to address.
I'll just say one quick thing. Thank you for explaining how it works on Apple, because it allowed me to search the web for how it works on Android, and there are similar functions in what's called the Play Store, which is one of the places you can download apps for your computer, and you can set that. And I haven't tried it yet to see what the choices are. I'm sure they're equally convoluted. You do have to set up family filters, and you have to get your children's phones under them, and then you have to set individual things. So it sounds like there may be something similar to that. All I'll say is it sounds like this is a place where the market could simplify the process, and probably have a competitive advantage for parents who do want to simply control this without going through everything that Representative Kutab just described, which sounds quite onerous, but it shouldn't be. Or that's my naive non-software engineer approach, is someone should be able to make that better, but I don't know whether that exists currently, and I don't know whether or not legislation would make it exist.
Representative McFarland?
And I just wanted to say, first of all, I sympathize greatly with Representative Kutab because I remember when I was younger and I was maybe like working the control of a VHS recorder or something, it operated intuitively. And to the mind of an engineer like ourselves, it was something that behaved exactly as I expected. I don't think my parents found it to be exactly as expected. what I feel now is that the device manufacturers have done such a good job of catering to the broad majority of their customers that the UX is very confusing to me for a lot of these things. And fortunately, we have AI to help us figure it out. But I very much agree and am appreciative of those comments because I think that's something we can do, right? According to what I'm looking at here on the Apple, it's not even nearly as complicated as was stated. And maybe it is, and maybe it isn't. But you either can go into screen time on the device or you can go to family sharing and screen time and manage it remotely. On the other hand, if you had said to me, well, before I looked at this bill, before I started looking at this stuff, well, where would I go to do content filtering and content restrictions? I would not have said to myself, yes, obviously it's under something called screen time. So I think there is a tremendous opportunity for us to treat this as an educational opportunity and maybe to treat this as an opportunity to say to the manufacturers that you need to provide some simpler mechanisms if we can take some of the other problematic teeth out of it, as Representative Tura was saying earlier.
Thank you. Representative Kutab?
So it sounds like, I want to make sure that I'm understanding correctly so we know like where to move forward from here. It's sounding like you guys would be agreeable to maybe saying that that this has to be easier to enable, as is saying in the bill, like when you're kind of starting up the phone here, and providing some education regarding it. But the concern was mostly around, I guess, all the penalties portions and whatnot regarding making it a felony and the private right of action. Is that correct?
I mean, I would add to that. I think Representative Tura spoke to this as well. It's not just about is it a Class B felony or is it a misdemeanor or is it just something that is ostensibly illegal but for which there's no explicit penalty. There's a lot of us that try and comport with the law and conform to the law, whether there is explicit penalty or not. And I don't want to create a circumstance where we are occasioning people as they try and exercise their liberties, as they try and hack on their computers and so forth, to turn into doing things that are against the law. On the other hand, I think that without necessarily engaging in any of those penalties for individuals, that we can be persuasive to manufacturers of devices that are consumed by, let's say, more than 30% of the New Hampshire population or 25% or whatever. But you know, the preeminent manufacturers here, that we can say there are some basic requirements that we would have on the types of device which are intended in the case of many users to be this closed ecosystem device that just functions to provide their child with the ability to do these few tasks and nothing more.
Representative Tur?
Yeah, and I guess in terms of the statement that that what you suggested, Representative Kutab, as consensus, I guess I still go back to the fact that I'm uncomfortable legislating that software be made better. You know, software evolves very, very rapidly, and there's huge incentives for any, producer to, to find a niche of users that want to exploit it and make their lives better. As I was searching for that, and by the way, I will point out that what I said a minute ago about how to do it on Android, it was AI that told me that. I'm also seeing, I won't read the name of the organization, but there's one piece of software, an app that says 2025's best parental control app. There's one down below it that says another app, block porn from your devices. So even beyond these filters, there are, sounds like, private organizations that are innovating ways of meeting the needs of parents. And I should also mention, I'm very sympathetic. We live in a world where control over what your children see is an unbelievable challenge, no matter what it is that you don't want them to see. I mean, there's stuff that's non-pornographic that I see browsing my computer that I'd be even more horrified if my kids saw, you know, and sometimes there are things being said by people that we know. Um, so, you know, it's an incredibly challenging device. You know, back when the printing press was the only way of sharing material, you know, that was pretty limited. Then, you know, then we got the magazines, and now we have basically, you know, the entire world in our pocket. I'm not unsympathetic to, you know, the challenge that people face. I'm just really wary of trying to create legislation that says this is how we're going to make it simpler for parents when there's every incentive in the world for these manufacturers to make it simpler for parents. And someone would say, you know, I'm going to buy that device because, you know, I want that kind of control and I don't have to go through everything that you outlined, you know, or one of these things that says, okay, if I care, you know, once I get my kid's phone, I'm going to download this app that blocks their devices and sets up a password. So I just didn't want it to sound like I would necessarily back this idea of, you know, legislating that this needs to be like simplified, even if I agree that it should be simplified.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your input. Anything else before we adjourn? No. All right. So I would just recommend that we continue to work on this. I know, like I already referenced, I'll be going away to a conference at the end of the month to discuss similar topics. There are some stakeholders in the room who we may want to reach out to and work with to see if we can address some of the issues that have come up today. But I really appreciate all of you being here, taking the time out on this day, and I appreciate the conversation and the candid conversation between all of us. So with that, I will close the subcommittee work session on House Bill 293. Thank you all. I actually really did appreciate that.